The sun had just started to rise and the waves shimmered like gold under the soft morning light. The air smelled fresh, salty, and peaceful. It was the kind of morning that made people believe nothing bad could ever happen. Lena stood on the dock with her small backpack and camera, excited for the short flight that would take her to the little island she had dreamed about for months. She wasn't a tourist in the usual sense. She loved quiet places untouched by crowds. The island she wanted to visit was known for its hidden beaches, clear water, and tall cliffs where seabirds nested. It was the perfect escape. She smiled at the pilot and the other passengers as they boarded the small seaplane. There were 5 of them in total, including the pilot. Everyone seemed cheerful, chatting about how beautiful the ocean looked from above. Lena found a seat near the window and held her camera tight. She had plans to take photos for a travel magazine, maybe even start her own blog someday. Her mother had hugged her tightly that morning, saying, "Be careful and call me once you land." Lena promised she would. As the plane lifted off, the sound of the engine mixed with laughter and the rush of wind. The sea sparkled below them like a giant mirror. Everything felt calm. Lena took pictures through the glass window, shots of the horizon, the tiny islands in the distance, and the sunlight bouncing off the waves. The pilot's voice came through the headset, saying they'd reach their destination in about 40 minutes. But halfway through the flight, the sky began to change. The clouds thickened and a faint rumble of thunder rolled across the horizon. The cheerful chatter faded as the plane started to shake slightly. Lena looked out the window again and saw dark waves forming below. The pilot's voice stayed calm, assuring everyone that it was just a patch of rough weather, nothing to worry about. Still, something in Lena's chest tightened. She wrapped her fingers around the seatbelt and tried to breathe slowly. A drop of rain hit the window, then another, until the whole sky turned gray. The radio crackled as the pilot tried to reach the control tower, but only static came back. "Signal's weak," he said, adjusting the controls. "It'll pass soon." The rain grew heavier. The passengers exchanged nervous glances. One man tried to joke about how it was just an island shower, but his voice trembled. The plane jolted sharply to one side. Lena's camera slipped from her lap and hit the floor. For a second, everything went silent except for the roar of the wind. Then came the sound no one wanted to hear, a deep, shuddering noise from the engine. The pilot's face tightened. He spoke quickly into the radio again, but there was no reply. The plane started to lose altitude. The sea, once calm and beautiful, now looked wild and angry beneath them. Lena could feel her heart pounding so loudly she could hardly think. The pilot shouted for everyone to brace for impact. Then came the crash. A loud cracking noise filled the air as the seaplane hit the water. The force threw everyone forward. Cold, salty waves burst through the windows. Lena's body was tossed against her seatbelt, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. The world spun, a blur of gray water, screaming voices, and metal breaking apart. The plane tilted, one wing snapping off as the waves swallowed it. When she opened her eyes, everything was chaos. Water filled the cabin. People were shouting, trying to undo their belts. The pilot yelled something, but his voice was drowned by the noise. Lena fought to free herself, pushing against the rising water. Her fingers slipped on the metal buckle, but finally it came loose. She kicked upward, following a thin shaft of light breaking through the window. Her lungs burned as she pushed through the freezing water and burst into the open air. The ocean roared around her. Pieces of the plane floated nearby. Seats, luggage, a wing half submerged. She could barely see anyone else. The rain poured down heavy and cold, and the waves tossed her back and forth. She screamed for help, but the wind carried her voice away. Then, through the storm, she saw another passenger, a middle-aged man clinging to a piece of the wing. She swam toward him, coughing and gasping for breath. "Hold on," she shouted, her voice shaking. Together, they clung to the floating debris as the wreck sank slowly out of sight. For hours they drifted, the storm raging around them. Every time Lena thought they might not make it, she remembered her mother's face and forced herself to keep holding on. When the rain finally stopped, the sea calmed a little and the sky began to clear. The man pointed toward something in the distance, land. It looked small, just a strip of green surrounded by rocks, but it was hope. They started paddling with their hands, pushing the broken piece of metal toward it. The current fought them, but slowly, painfully, they got closer. By the time they reached the shore, the sun was setting and both of them were too exhausted to speak. Lena collapsed onto the sand, coughing up salt water. For a long time, she just lay there, staring at the sky. The stars began to appear one by one. silent witnesses to the wreck that had taken so many lives. She whispered a quiet thank you to whoever or whatever had helped her survive. The next morning, she woke to the sound of waves. Her clothes were still soaked, her throat dry, and her body sore. The man she'd come ashore with was sitting near a tree, staring out at the water. They didn't talk much. There wasn't anything to say. They both knew the chances of being rescued were slim. They searched the beach for anything useful. A few small suitcases had washed up, mostly empty. Lena found a bottle, some clothes, and a broken camera lens. Hers. She picked it up and held it tight. It felt like a small piece of her old life. A reminder of who she was before everything changed. As days passed, they built a small shelter out of palm branches. They found coconuts and drank the water inside to stay hydrated. It wasn't much, but it kept them alive. Each day they hoped to see a plane or a ship, but none came. The man's health began to worsen. He had swallowed too much seawater and couldn't keep food down. Lena tried to care for him, but she had no medicine, no supplies. One night under the stars, he whispered, "If someone finds you, tell them we tried." By morning, he was gone. Lena buried him near the trees, marking the spot with stones. Then she sat by the ocean and cried for a long time. She thought about her mother, probably still waiting for a call that would never come. She wanted to give up, but something deep inside refused. Every morning she walked to the beach and wrote one word in the sand: help. The days blurred together. Sunrise, sunset, storms, silence. Her hair grew tangled. Her skin burned from the sun and her voice grew weak from shouting at the empty sky. Yet she never stopped hoping. She started collecting rainwater and leaves, and she learned to crack coconuts open with a rock. The island became her world, a place of survival, fear, and tiny victories. Far away, back on the mainland, Lena's disappearance made headlines. The rescue team searched for days, sending helicopters and boats across hundreds of miles. They found small pieces of wreckage, floating luggage, a torn seat, part of a wing, but no survivors. Eventually, the search was called off. The families were told that everyone aboard had likely drowned. Lena's mother couldn't accept it. She refused to hold a memorial, refused to say goodbye. Every day she called the authorities asking if there was any update. When none came, she began visiting the harbor where her daughter had last been seen. People said she was in denial, but she didn't care. Deep down, she felt something others didn't. A quiet certainty that her daughter was still alive somewhere. Weeks passed. Most people moved on. The world had other stories, other tragedies, but not everyone forgot. One of the search pilots, a man named Ethan Clark, couldn't shake the memory of that missing plane. He had flown over that same stretch of ocean many times, and every time he looked down, he thought about the people who never made it home. One morning, while flying a regular patrol route, he noticed something strange, a faint glint near the edge of an island chain that hadn't been searched before. It was barely visible, just a small reflection that disappeared as quickly as it came, but it made him curious. He circled around again, flying lower this time. Through his binoculars, he saw what looked like a piece of metal half buried in the sand. It was dull and weathered, but the shape was familiar. He took a few photos, planning to report it later. Just as he was about to turn back, something caught his eye again. Large letters drawn into the sand, barely visible from the air. They looked like they spelled help. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. He wasn't sure if it was real or just a trick of light, but he couldn't ignore it. When he landed, he sent the pictures to his supervisor with a short message attached. It said, "I think I found her." When Ethan sent that short message, "I think I found her," he wasn't sure anyone would believe him. The search had been called off weeks ago. People had moved on. Most believed no one could have survived that long out there, but Ethan couldn't ignore what he saw. Those letters in the sand didn't look natural. They looked like someone's last attempt to be seen. He waited for hours, checking his phone, hoping for a reply from the Coast Guard. When the message finally came, it wasn't encouraging. Old wreckage, likely a fishing boat, nothing new. Ethan leaned back in his chair and stared at the photos again. He zoomed in on the one that showed the sandy shore. It was faint, almost washed away by the tide, but the letters were still visible. He whispered to himself, "That's not just random marks." That night he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that stretch of sand and the reflection of metal. Something inside him told him he was missing something important. Around midnight, he got up, turned on his laptop and began going through old search maps. He compared flight paths, weather patterns, and ocean currents from the day of the crash. The spot he flew over wasn't covered during the official search. It had been marked as too dangerous because of unpredictable storms. He sat back in his chair and sighed. If she's really there, he thought, then everyone's given up too soon. By morning, Ethan made his decision. He couldn't let it go. He gathered his flight footage, photos, and notes and drove straight to the rescue base. The officers looked surprised when he walked in holding a folder thick with papers. "Clark, you're still on this?" One of them asked, half amused. "Just hear me out," Ethan said. "The reflection I saw wasn't from a fishing boat. It's aircraft metal, and those markings on the sand, someone made them." The room went quiet for a moment. The supervisor, an older man with tired eyes, took the folder and flipped through the photos. "You're sure?" Ethan nodded. "I can't say it's her, but I can say someone was or still is alive there." After a long pause, the supervisor said, "We can't launch a full mission again. Funding's tight and it's been too long." Ethan took a deep breath. "Then I'll go myself. Just one flight. If there's nothing, I'll drop it." The older man studied him for a while, then finally nodded. "You've got clearance for one run. Be careful, and for your sake, I hope you're right." Ethan spent the next few hours preparing his small search plane. As he checked the fuel levels and tested the radio, he thought about the faces of the people who had been on that flight, their families, their stories. Most of all, he thought about Lena, the young woman whose photo he had seen in the news smiling beside the seaplane before takeoff. Something about that picture had stayed with him. Meanwhile, on the island, Lena sat near her small shelter, staring out at the endless blue. The days had started blending together. She had lost count of how long she'd been there. Her body was thin and weak, her lips dry from the sun. She had stopped crying weeks ago. Now she just waited. Every morning she walked to the same spot on the beach and wrote "help" in big letters. Then she'd sit on the rocks and look up at the sky, hoping to see something, anything. Sometimes she thought she heard a plane, but it always turned out to be just the wind or waves. Still, she couldn't let go of hope. "If they stop looking," she whispered to herself one day, "I won't stop believing." She thought often about her mother, how she would never give up. That thought alone kept her going. She tried to stay busy, collecting coconuts, building small fires, keeping track of days by lining up little stones. But as time went on, her strength began to fade. One morning she woke up dizzy. Her vision blurred and her legs felt too heavy to stand. She knew she needed water, but the coconuts had become harder to find. She crawled to the beach and pressed her hand into the sand, whispering, "Please, someone see me." That same morning, Ethan took off from the mainland. The sky was clear, the wind light. He adjusted his headset and turned the plane toward the coordinates he'd marked. His stomach was tight with nervous energy. He had no idea what he'd find, maybe nothing, maybe wreckage, but he had to know. As the ocean stretched below him, he scanned the water carefully. Every shadow or sparkle made him lean forward, his eyes fixed. The minutes passed slowly. Then as he neared the island chain, he saw it again, the small curve of sand surrounded by rocks. "All right," he said softly, gripping the controls. "Let's see." He circled once, lower this time. The waves crashed against the shore, white foam glistening in the sun. At first he saw nothing unusual, just driftwood and seaweed. But then there it was. The letters. Fainter now, almost erased by the tide, but still there. "Help!" His heart began to race. He circled again, this time noticing something else. Dark patches near the tree line like burned logs. Could it be a campfire? He snapped more photos and then reached for his radio. "Base, this is Clark. I'm over the site. I repeat, I'm over the site. There are signs of human presence here. I need a team ready." The voice on the other end crackled. "Copy that, Clark. Sending coordinates to rescue. Are you sure it's recent?" Ethan looked again at the beach. A figure was moving near the trees, small, slow, almost like a shadow. He blinked, not sure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. But then the figure stepped out toward the open sand and waved. He froze. "Base, this is Clark," he said again, voice shaking. "Someone's alive. I repeat, someone's alive." Down below, Lena was waving both arms, her voice cracking as she shouted at the sky. The sound of the plane was like music to her ears. She stumbled forward, nearly falling into the sand, but she didn't stop waving. The plane dipped its wings slightly. A signal she remembered from somewhere. It meant, "I see you." Tears streamed down her face. After so many days of silence, someone had finally seen her. She dropped to her knees, laughing and crying at once. Ethan circled one more time before heading back toward the mainland to call in the rescue. His hands were trembling as he gripped the radio. "Tell her family," he said. "Tell them she's alive." Back at the base, the room exploded into motion. Boats were prepared, medical teams assembled. Word spread quickly. Someone from the missing seaplane had been found. Lena's mother got the call she had prayed for every night. At first, she didn't believe it. "Are you sure?" she asked through tears. "Are you sure it's her?" The officer on the other end said softly, "Yes, ma'am. We believe so." While the rescue team raced toward the island, Ethan waited at the airstrip. He couldn't calm down. His mind kept replaying the moment he saw that figure waving. He knew what it meant, to be seen after everyone had stopped looking. Hours later, as the rescue boat approached the island, the crew saw smoke rising from the shore. It was a weak fire struggling against the wind. As they came closer, they spotted a woman standing near the water's edge, thin, sunburned but alive. She was holding a piece of driftwood like a flag. When they reached her, one of the rescuers jumped into the shallow water and ran toward her. "We've got you," he said gently. "You're safe now." Lena's voice was hoarse as she whispered. "The others? The plane. We'll take care of everything," he said. "You're safe." They helped her onto the boat, wrapping her in a blanket. She kept looking back at the island as if afraid it might disappear. "I thought I'd die there," she murmured. But something told me not to stop hoping. The crew didn't speak much. They all felt the weight of what had happened. One of them sent a short radio message ahead. "Survivor found, female. Condition weak but stable." When the boat docked, medical staff rushed to help her. Cameras and news reporters waited nearby, though she was too dazed to notice. The first thing she asked for was her mother. Hours later, after being checked by doctors and given water, she finally reunited with her mother. They held each other tightly, both crying so hard they could barely speak. The people around them wiped their own eyes. It was one of those moments that reminded everyone why hope mattered. Later, as Lena rested in the hospital, Ethan visited quietly. He didn't want attention or thanks. He just wanted to see her safe. When she opened her eyes and recognized him from the news photo, she smiled weakly. "You found me," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "You found yourself." "I just happened to see it." For a moment, neither spoke. The world outside the hospital was full of noise, reporters, flashing cameras, the hum of excitement. But inside that quiet room, it was just two people who knew what it meant to hold on when everyone else had given up. As he left, he looked out the window toward the distant horizon. Somewhere out there was the small island, the same place where she'd fought to stay alive. He knew he'd never forget it. And though Lena's voice was weak, her words that evening stayed with him forever. Hope doesn't sink, not if you keep believing someone will see you. When the news spread that someone had survived the crash, it was like a spark had been lit in the darkness. People who had long given up suddenly started talking about miracles again. TV channels replayed the headline over and over, "Woman found alive after weeks lost at sea." Viewers watched in disbelief, and around the world, strangers whispered the same thing. How did she make it? At the hospital, Lena woke up to a quiet morning. The first thing she saw was the ceiling light above her, not the sky. For a second, she didn't know where she was. The white walls, the faint sound of machines, the clean sheets, it all felt too calm, too unreal. Then she turned her head and saw her mother sitting beside her bed, eyes red but smiling softly. "You're really here," her mother whispered, her voice shaking. "I knew you were alive." Lena's eyes filled with tears. Her voice came out weak and dry. "I didn't think I'd see you again." Her mother took her hand and pressed it to her cheek. I never stopped waiting. For a long time, they didn't speak. They just held on to each other. After everything Lena had been through, she needed time to understand that this was real, that she wasn't still trapped on that island, waiting for help that never came. Over the next few days, doctors and nurses moved in and out of her room, checking her vitals, making sure she was eating again. They called her recovery remarkable. Her body was weak, but her spirit was strong. Each night, when she closed her eyes, flashes of the island came back. The waves, the wreckage, the sound of the wind. She'd wake up gasping, half expecting to see sand under her instead of sheets. The doctors said it would take time for her mind to rest. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, the world wanted her story. Reporters camped at the gates waiting to ask questions. How did you survive? What happened on the plane? Did you believe you'd be rescued? Everyone wanted to hear from the woman who had beaten the ocean, but Lena wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Every time she tried to speak about it, her voice broke. Some things felt too heavy to describe with words. Ethan visited again a few days later. He came quietly without a camera or crowd. When he walked into the room, Lena smiled faintly. He looked different without the flight uniform, just a simple shirt and tired eyes that still carried the memory of that day. I wanted to check how you're doing, he said gently. I'm better, she replied. They're taking good care of me. He nodded and sat on the chair near her bed. There was a comfortable silence between them, the kind that doesn't need words. Then Lena said softly, when you saw me, did you know for sure it was a person? At first, no, he admitted. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but something in me said to look again. She looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. I kept writing that word every day. I didn't know if anyone would ever see it. Ethan smiled slightly. Someone did. They both laughed a little, though it was the kind of laugh that comes from relief more than joy. Before he left, Ethan said, You're stronger than you know. Lena, don't let the world turn your story into something it isn't. You lived it. You get to tell it your way. Those words stayed with her. As the days turned into weeks, Lena slowly began to recover her strength. She walked short distances down the hospital hallway, her steps unsteady at first. The nurses encouraged her, saying she was healing faster than expected. But every time she heard a plane pass overhead, her heart would race. It reminded her of the crash, of that sound before everything fell apart. Her mother often sat with her during therapy, reading aloud or playing her favorite songs. At night, when the hospital quieted, Lena would stare out the window and think about the man she had buried on the island. His name, his voice, his last words, they replayed in her mind. She wished she could tell his family that he hadn't been alone in the end. One afternoon, a reporter managed to sneak past security and knock on her door. He spoke kindly, not pushy, asking if she'd share her story to inspire others. At first, she wanted to say no, but something changed in her. She realized that if she stayed silent, people might only remember the crash, not the will to survive that kept her alive. So she agreed on one condition, that the story would be told truthfully without exaggeration. When the interview aired, it wasn't flashy. It showed her sitting quietly by the hospital window, her hands folded. Her voice was calm as she told what happened, the crash, the ocean, the island, and the words she wrote in the sand every morning. Hope, she said softly, was the only thing I had left. When the body gets weak, the heart becomes stronger. That's what kept me alive. The world listened. The story spread everywhere. People who had lost someone at sea or in disasters reached out, saying her courage helped them believe again. Letters and messages poured in from across the country. Some people called her a miracle, but Lena didn't see herself that way. She always said, I was just someone who didn't stop waiting. Ethan watched the interview too, sitting alone in his small apartment. He didn't expect her to mention him, but she did. A man I never met before looked a second time when everyone else stopped, she said. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person who refuses to stop looking. He smiled quietly to himself. A few weeks later, Lena was strong enough to go outside. The first time she stepped into the sunlight again, she closed her eyes and just stood there, feeling the warmth on her face. Her mother stood beside her, holding her arm in case she got dizzy. Around them, the hospital garden was full of color. Flowers, trees, birds singing. After so many weeks of gray skies and waves, the world looked alive again. One evening, the head of the rescue department invited Lena to a small gathering. It wasn't a press event, just a private moment to honor those who had taken part in the search. She hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready, but she agreed. When she arrived, she saw familiar faces, pilots, Coast Guard members, medics. And there, near the back of the room, was Ethan. He gave her a small nod, the same quiet respect he had shown from the beginning. After the speeches, Lena walked up to him. They keep calling me brave, she said with a tired smile. But I think you're the brave one. You didn't have to go back out there, he shook his head. I couldn't ignore what I saw. Maybe bravery is just refusing to look away. For a moment, they stood in silence. Then she said, I don't know how to thank you. You already did, he replied. That night after the event ended, Lena stood outside the building and looked up at the sky. Planes blinked faintly in the distance. She didn't feel fear this time, only peace. The past was still part of her, but it no longer controlled her. She decided that when she was fully recovered, she'd visit the island one last time, not as a victim, but as someone who had survived. A month later, the chance came. The government arranged for her and a small team to return to the crash site to gather any remaining evidence. When they asked if she wanted to go, she said yes. Ethan volunteered to fly the trip. He told her quietly, We'll go back together. The day they flew out, Lena sat by the window again just like before. The ocean below looked calm and endless. She could feel her heartbeat quicken, but she kept her eyes open. This time she wasn't afraid of the sea. She respected it. When they reached the island, she recognized it instantly. The same curved beach, the same tall trees. But it looked different now, smaller somehow. She stepped out of the boat and felt the sand beneath her feet. The word help was long gone, washed away by time. The little shelter she had built had fallen apart. Nature had started to take everything back. Lena walked to the spot where she had buried the man who didn't make it. The stones were still there, though covered in moss. She knelt and whispered a few words, thanking him for helping her survive those first days. A few feet away, she saw a piece of metal half buried in sand, the last part of the plane. She touched it gently, her reflection faint in the dull surface. Ethan stood nearby, watching quietly. He didn't interrupt. Some moments needed silence. After a while, Lena picked up a small piece of driftwood and began carving letters into it with a pocket knife. When she finished, she placed it in the sand near the trees. The words were simple. Hope never dies. When they flew back later that afternoon, Lena looked down at the island one last time. The waves shimmered in the sunlight, and for the first time since the crash, she smiled, not with relief but with peace. She had faced the ocean, the fear and the loneliness, and lived to tell the story. Back home, she started writing about her experience, not for fame but to remind others that survival isn't just about strength. It's about belief. Her story wasn't about tragedy anymore. It was about faith, resilience, and the power of being seen. As she wrote the last line of her story one night, she paused for a moment and whispered softly, "Thank you," as if speaking to the sky. Somewhere far away, maybe in that same stretch of sea, the wind carried her words. The morning air was heavy with mist as the rescue helicopter lifted off again. Ethan sat in the front seat, gripping the control stick tightly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He had barely slept, his mind replaying the image of that small shelter. The footprints and the torn piece of fabric they had found the day before. Every sign pointed to the same impossible thought. Someone had survived. The others inside the helicopter were quiet. They all felt the same mix of hope and fear. After so many weeks, could it really be true? The ocean had taken so much already. But Ethan couldn't ignore his instincts. He believed she was out there somewhere, holding on, waiting for someone to find her. The helicopter flew low, skimming just above the treetops. The island below was still, almost peaceful. Waves crashed against the rocks, sending white spray into the air. It looked beautiful from above, but Ethan knew it hid a harsh truth. This place was isolated, rough, and alive with danger. If someone had survived there for this long, it would be nothing short of a miracle. He turned to his co-pilot and nodded. "We'll land near the same clearing as yesterday." The moment the helicopter touched the ground, the search team jumped out. The morning sun had just started breaking through the mist, casting soft light over the trees. Ethan led the way, his eyes scanning every shadow, every movement. He carried a small radio clipped to his vest, ready to signal the base if they found anything. They reached the beach first, the same one where they had spotted the footprints. Ethan knelt down, brushing away the sand with his hand. The footprints were faint now, partly washed away by the tide. Still, he could tell they were fresh, maybe only a day or two old. "She's been here," he murmured. One of the rescuers pointed toward the jungle. "If she's alive, she probably moved inland to find shade or water." Ethan nodded. "Let's go." They entered the jungle slowly, pushing aside thick vines and ferns. The air was hot and damp. Insects buzzed around their faces. Every sound made them pause, the snap of a branch, the call of a bird. The further they went, the stronger Ethan's heartbeat grew. Something deep inside told him they were getting closer. After nearly an hour of searching, they reached a narrow stream running through the island. The water looked clean, flowing gently over smooth stones. Nearby, they spotted pieces of a torn backpack, faded from sun and rain. Inside it were a few shells, a broken camera, and a wet piece of paper with faint writing. It was impossible to read, but Ethan felt sure it belonged to her. "This is hers," he said softly. They followed the stream further up, hoping it would lead them to where she might have stayed. Then suddenly they heard something, a faint rustle like someone moving through the leaves. The men froze. Ethan raised his hand for silence. He listened closely. It wasn't the wind. It was something or someone trying to move quietly. He called out, his voice steady but gentle. "Hello, can you hear me?" "We're here to help." For a few seconds there was no answer, only the sound of the waves in the distance. Then from behind a group of trees they saw movement. A figure stepped out slowly, almost cautiously. It was a woman. She looked thin, her clothes torn and sun-bleached, her hair tangled by the wind. Her skin was burnt from the sun, and her eyes, though tired, were still alert, still alive. She blinked against the light, holding one hand above her eyes as if to make sure what she was seeing was real. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He took a step forward, lowering his voice. "It's okay. You're safe now." The woman looked at him, her lips trembling. For a moment she seemed unsure if she should speak. Then, in a cracked, hoarse whisper, she said, "I heard the plane. I knew someone would come." Ethan dropped his radio and ran to her. The others followed. She nearly collapsed in his arms, weak from exhaustion. One of the rescuers handed her water, and she drank slowly, tears mixing with the salt on her cheeks. They wrapped her in a blanket and helped her sit on a nearby log. Ethan knelt beside her, speaking softly. "What's your name?" "Lena," she whispered. The sound of her voice made his eyes fill with tears. He radioed back to base immediately, his voice breaking as he said the words he'd been waiting to say for weeks. "We found her alive." There was silence on the other end for a moment, then the sound of cheering and disbelief. The voice of the commander came through, full of emotion. "Repeat that, Ethan." He smiled through his tears. "I said we found her. She's alive." The helicopter arrived soon after to take her back. While they waited, Lena slowly told them her story. Her words came out in pieces, but every sentence felt like a miracle. The plane had gone down after hitting sudden turbulence. The pilot tried to control it, but the engine failed and they crash-landed near the water. The impact was rough. Lena and one other passenger managed to grab onto a broken piece of the float and drift toward the island. The others didn't make it. For the first few days she stayed near the beach, hoping for rescue. But no one came. She found rainwater to drink and coconuts to eat, learning to climb trees despite her injuries. The other passenger grew weaker and passed away after the fourth day, leaving her completely alone. She built a small shelter out of branches and palm leaves. Every morning she wrote "help" in the sand, praying that someone, somewhere, would see it. When storms came, she hid inside her shelter, clutching the only thing she had left, her broken camera. It reminded her of the world she wanted to return to. As she spoke, Ethan and the others listened in silence. Her story wasn't just about survival. It was about courage beyond anything they had ever seen. When the helicopter finally arrived, the wind from its blades whipped through the trees. Lena looked up at the sky, her eyes wide with wonder. For the first time in weeks, she saw something that didn't look like a dream. Ethan helped her to her feet. She was weak, but she managed to stand, leaning on his arm. As they walked toward the helicopter, she paused for a moment and looked back at the island. "That place kept me alive," she said softly. "I hated it, but it saved me." Ethan nodded. "And you saved yourself." She smiled faintly, then climbed aboard. As the helicopter lifted off, she watched the island grow smaller below them, a tiny green dot surrounded by endless blue. She closed her eyes, finally letting herself breathe. Back at the rescue base, the news spread quickly. Everyone wanted to see the woman who had been lost for nearly a month. When Lena's mother got the call, she fell to her knees in disbelief. Her daughter was alive. The nightmare was finally over. When they landed, the medical team rushed to help Lena, but she refused to go inside until she thanked Ethan. She held his hand tightly and said, "You didn't give up on me. Thank you for coming back." He shook his head, smiling gently. You made it because you never gave up on yourself. Lena spent the next few days in the hospital, recovering slowly. Reporters camped outside wanting every detail, but she asked for privacy. She wanted to heal quietly away from the noise. Ethan visited her once before returning to his usual duties. He didn't stay long, just long enough to see her smile again. Before he left, she gave him a small seashell she had kept from the island. For luck, she said. He took it, smiling. I think you've already given me plenty. As he walked out of the hospital, Ethan looked up at the sky. The same blue sky that had hidden her for so long now felt different, warmer somehow. He knew he'd never forget her or the message he'd sent that day. I think I found her. It wasn't just a message about discovery. It was proof that hope, no matter how small, can light up even the darkest places. That night, Lena slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. The sound of the ocean no longer haunted her dreams. Instead, she dreamed of home, of her mother's face, and of the pilot who refused to stop searching. Some stories don't need grand endings or headlines. Sometimes the miracle is simple. It's the moment when someone opens their eyes and realizes they were never truly forgotten. The world woke up to the kind of news that gives everyone a reason to pause. Lost woman found alive after 23 days, the headlines read. Across television screens and social media, people shared her story with disbelief and relief. For so long, everyone thought Lena had vanished beneath the waves. But now there she was, alive, fragile, yet full of quiet strength. At the hospital, the hallways were filled with soft chatter and camera flashes, though Lena was hidden away in a small private room. The doctor said she needed rest both for her body and her mind. She had lost weight. Her skin showed the harsh signs of the sun, and her body was weak from hunger. But her heart was strong, stronger than anyone had imagined. Her mother arrived that morning. She had barely slept for days, pacing and praying, refusing to believe her daughter was gone. When she saw Lena lying on the hospital bed, her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she couldn't move. Then, with trembling hands, she rushed forward and held her tightly. Lena cried softly against her shoulder. I didn't think I'd see you again, she whispered. Her mother stroked her hair gently, unable to speak. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the machines and their quiet sobs of relief. For the first time in weeks, everything felt still again. Outside the hospital, people gathered to leave flowers and cards. Some of them had never met her, but they said her story gave them hope. The world had watched her disappear, and now it was watching her return. Ethan visited a few days later. He didn't come in uniform this time. He stood by the doorway, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked on his way. When Lena saw him, her face lit up. You came, she said softly. I couldn't stay away, he replied with a small smile. He sat beside her bed, and for a moment they said nothing. The silence wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. They didn't need to talk about what happened. They both knew what it meant. Do you remember the first thing you said to me? Ethan asked after a while. Lena smiled faintly. I said I heard the plane. Yeah, he nodded. That's when I knew you hadn't given up. She looked out the window, her eyes tracing the clouds in the distance. I didn't give up because I kept thinking of home. I thought if I stopped believing, it would all be over. He nodded again, quietly admiring her courage. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a reminder of how powerful hope could be. After a few minutes, Ethan stood up. I just wanted to see how you were doing, he said. You're in good hands now. Before he left, Lena reached for his hand. You're the reason I'm here. Don't ever think otherwise, he smiled, squeezing her hand gently. I only followed what felt right. That night, as Lena rested, she began writing in a small notebook the nurses had given her. She wanted to remember everything. Not just the fear and hunger, but also the strange beauty of survival. The stars she watched alone, the sound of waves that sometimes felt like a friend's whisper, and the day she saw a plane and knew her prayers were finally heard. Weeks passed, and Lena grew stronger. The color returned to her face, her hair was trimmed, and she began taking slow walks in the hospital garden. Whenever the wind brushed her skin, she would close her eyes and smile. She said it reminded her of the sea breeze from the island, the same wind that once felt endless, now comforting. When she was finally discharged, reporters surrounded the hospital entrance. Cameras flashed, microphones appeared, and voices shouted questions. How did you survive? What was it like out there? Do you remember the crash? Lena stopped for a moment and answered calmly. I survived because I never lost hope, and because someone didn't stop looking for me. Her words traveled everywhere. People shared them online, quoting her courage. But to Lena, it wasn't about fame or being on the news. It was about gratitude to the people who didn't give up, and to life itself for giving her another chance. A few weeks later, the rescue team invited her to visit the base. She wanted to thank everyone in person. When she arrived, the pilots and crew stood waiting, smiling proudly. Ethan was there too, leaning against the side of the aircraft that had found her. She handed out small thank you cards to everyone, each one handwritten. When she gave Ethan his, he opened it and found a single line inside. Sometimes the sky listens when you speak from the heart. He smiled and folded it carefully. You really are a writer, he said. She laughed softly. Maybe I am now. They talked for a while about what she planned to do next. Lena said she wanted to use her story to help others, to remind people that even in the darkest moments, there's always something worth holding on to. In the following months, Lena returned to the island with a small crew. It wasn't an easy decision. The memories there were heavy, but she felt she needed to go back, not to relive the pain, but to face it when she stepped onto the beach again. The same one where she'd once written help in the sand. She stood still for a long time. The sea looked calm that day, the water a deep blue under the sun. She knelt down and touched the sand, feeling the warmth of it beneath her fingers. In her hand, she carried a small wooden sign. With Ethan's help, she placed it near the edge of the beach, close to where her old shelter once stood. It read, "Hope never dies." She smiled as the wind caught her hair, the sound of waves rising softly behind her. The island no longer felt like a place of fear. It felt like a place of strength, a reminder of what she had overcome. When they left, Lena looked back one last time. She didn't feel trapped by the memory anymore. She felt free. Months later, a documentary was made about her story. It wasn't sensational or dramatic. It was honest, quiet, and full of heart. In it, she talked about the little moments, the sound of rain on the palm leaves, the nights she counted stars, and the day she thought she saw a plane, but it turned out to be just a shadow. But even that shadow gave me strength, she said with a gentle smile. People around the world watched her story and felt something stir inside them. Some said it made them call their families more often. Others said it gave them courage to face their own struggles. Lena never liked being called a hero. She always said the real heroes were the people who searched, the pilot who refused to give up, and everyone who believed she could still be found. On the 1-year anniversary of her rescue, she met Ethan again at a small seaside cafe. The sea stretched out endlessly before them, calm and bright. You still flying? She asked. He nodded. Every day, though I always keep an eye on the horizon now. She smiled. Me too, in a way. They sat quietly for a while, watching the sunlight dance on the water. Then Lena said softly, It's strange, isn't it? How something that almost took your life can end up teaching you how to live. Ethan nodded. Life has a way of reminding us what matters. They stayed there until the sun began to sink below the horizon. Before leaving, Lena took out a small notebook, the same one she'd started in the hospital, and wrote a single line. The sea didn't take me. It taught me to keep swimming. As she closed it, she smiled to herself. That chapter of her life was over, but the lesson would stay forever. Over time, Lena's story became more than just news. Schools used it as a message about resilience, and families shared it around dinner tables. She started speaking at small gatherings, telling people not to lose faith, not in others, and not in themselves. Whenever someone asked her what kept her alive, she always gave the same answer: hope. It's invisible, but it's the strongest thing you can hold. In the end, her life wasn't defined by the crash or the days she spent stranded. It was defined by the moment she stood on that beach again and realized she had turned her pain into purpose. Ethan kept the seashell she had given him on his desk in the cockpit. Every time he flew over open water, he touched it for luck. And sometimes, when the clouds cleared and sunlight shimmered on the waves below, he'd think back to the message he'd sent that day. I think I found her. He hadn't just found her. He had found proof that miracles still exist, not the kind that fall from the sky, but the kind that live in people who refuse to stop believing. And somewhere, miles away, Lena sat by her window watching the same sunset, the sea glowing gold in the fading light. She smiled quietly to herself, whispering the words written on that sign by the island shore. Hope never dies.